Hi, I'm JR. I am back with Dr. Robert. Hello, Dr. Robert.
Hello, JR.
We are going to talk Limping for a Generation. Now, clearly, if we talked everything you did up till the point at which you recorded Limping for a Generation, we'd probably be here talking for about 15 hours. And that is a conversation probably for another time and maybe even another medium. So I propose to start the conversation at the point at which you sign with the record company, and we'll talk about the album itself rather than all of the things that led up to it.
Okay.
And at the end... Oh, sorry, go on.
God for that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we can have another pre-signing conversation at some point in the future, I guess, or maybe you'll want to tell that story another way, but if that's a story you want to tell.
All right.
But then, at the end of the last time we talked, I made sort of a sort of weird reference to the fact that record companies will often change things. And I didn't necessarily mean we'll be interfering and we'll change things for the worst. And so I'm proposing to try and ask you about memories from 40 years and more ago now, I suppose. And I don't know whether you will remember, but I cannot imagine what it's like signing that deal to have a record contract, knowing that somebody's going to essentially pay for you to go into a studio, make an album. Do you remember, A, how you felt about that? And B, because obviously, clearly, this is the point at which money, serious money, sometimes gets involved. Was there much stipulation from them about what they wanted you to do? Or did you feel sort of the onus to try and live up to some kind of expectation?
Okay, so that's question 1A, parts A and B.
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Next. No, okay. We got signed in 1983. I actually got signed as a writer first by RCA Publishing, by a guy called Lucien Grange, who, if anybody has done their homework, will know that now Lucien is what's known as God. In other words, he's the head of Universal Worldwide, and I believe he lives in a great big castle somewhere outside of LA.
Wow.
Lucien back then was a more minor figure and had sought me out and signed me as a writer. And then we were about to sign to London Records for a singles deal. They offered us a deal to do some singles, which I was up for. I liked London Records. I liked Tracy Bennett was the guy. And then the guy called Jack Stephen came along to a gig. We had a small residency at the Moonlight Club, West Hampstead. That was our first big break, I guess, where record companies started to come along, and suddenly RCA offered us an album deal. So a guy called Jack Stephen took us out for a dinner. First time I'd ever had that, the record company dinner, which soon became the norm. All on our bill, but you don't know that at the time.
No, yeah.
And then, and proceeded to come and watch us rehearse. I remember we were rehearsing at a place called Clink, which was down by London Bridge, Tower Bridge, London Bridge. And he signed us on an album deal. 2 weeks later, he disappeared. He left the company. I believe, true story is he went into rehab.
Oh, wow.
So Jack left us, and we were suddenly there with an album deal on RCA. At this point, RCA I think they had Eurythmics were beginning to happen, and a band called Joe Boxers, who had a couple of hit singles. And we were there, signed to do an album with no support within the company, except for this one guy that we used to keep seeing at our gigs, who was really a T-boy at RCA, and his name was Corder Marshall. Fast forward, 5, 6 years later, Corder is the managing director of BMG. He goes right to the top and has his own label, Infectious, and Corder's a bit of a ledge. I love Corder. He's a real music guy. Never wore a suit. Was always on our side. Proper music man. So he just said, "Look, you've signed. I think you should just go into rehearsals and we'll figure out what we're going to do with you. We'll try and get you on tour." They tried to get, we did tours with people like Lloyd Cole and people like that, and all sorts of inappropriate support gigs with bands like the Sisters of Mercy.
Yeah.
And X. But anyway, we disappeared into the kind of nether regions of Nomis rehearsal studios in West London for about 6 months. And we had only recently kind of got Tony Carley in as drummer because Angus had left, or we'd sacked Angus, and I wish we hadn't, but he was too good looking, and he had to go. But Tony upped our game. It was a real proper. And so we went into rehearsals with him, and pretty much every song that we got signed on, we ditched, except for Man from Russia.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of songs that really were supposed to be the first album. And I just kept writing and writing ferociously, trying to get better, trying to figure out what the hell it was that we were and where we were going to go. And eventually they said, well, we better make this album. We put a single out, I think, and it was Single of the Week in NME, Go Public. It wasn't very good, but,
it's kind of...
It garnered some attention,
It kind of, that's the point at which new wave and two-tone, I suppose, are happening. And although you weren't two-tone, you had the brass thing. So I guess something like Go Public probably sounded very of the moment at the time when it came out.
I mean, I was still in the midst of my Laughing Clown's birthday party obsession, but at the same time, there were other things coming through, attempts to write in that kind of classic pop, Bacharach and David style, bits of Bolan, bits of this, bits of everything, bits of soul, all sorts of stuff coming together. And I remember the RCA saying, well, what are you? How do we? I said, we're glam jazz. I think at the time the Smiths had broken through, and there was a lot of talk about vegetarianism because of so I said, look, put up on the posters Last of the Great Meat Eaters, the Blow Monkeys, Glam Jazz, and that was the poster for Go Public. I think that confused people, but it kind of got us. And then I knew, and then we put Man from Russia out. And by this time we sort of had written a demo. We went into the Point in a studio where we loved the Point. It was in Victoria with a guy called Alex Burak, who was our engineer, who really helped me. And we recorded all the demos for what became that album, and lots more, So we were left alone basically, and they said, "Well, who do you want?" And I said, "Who do you want to produce?" And I didn't really think about the fact that the budget and all that. I just assumed that they would say yes. It was RCA,
Yeah.
So I want a guy called Pete Wilson, who had produced. He was doing the Style Council, but he'd done the Jam's last few singles, and I loved the sound of one song by the Jam called "Funeral Pyre," which is this cacophonous kind of drums. And I mean, years later, I find it's Paul really. It's Paul that's really producing. I mean, Pete did a lot, but Paul was really. But I loved working with Pete Wilson, and so we went to Solid Bond Studios with him, Paul's studio, Stanhope Place up near Marble Arch, and it felt fantastic to be going in there. And all of a sudden, we started to hear the songs come to life, and he was getting strings in, and there were orchestras. And I remember just sitting there with a big split with my headphones on, doing the vocals on top of Professor Supercool, and here on top of this, thinking, God, how did we get here? Listen to that, there's strings going on, and Pete Wilson's marvelous string arrangements, and my songs, which were struggling for form, but they had a kind of weird attraction because the chord progressions were all wrong and everything was all wrong.
Wow,
but it kind of worked, if you know what I mean.
Well, I did want to ask you about that. Oh, and I suppose there's two questions there again. So again, I'm going to ask you two questions at once. But one of these things is, that the single that you'd put out before, Live Today, Love Tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's got that sort of new wavy sound to it, rather more so than the sound you eventually land on with Limping. And of course, after Limping, you move on to another sound again, I suppose.
Yeah.
But somewhere in the studio, you move from Live Today, Go Public, and you get Professor Supercool, Wildflower, things like that.
Yeah.
And you've already mentioned that you were sort of trying to find a sound. Was there a deliberate leaning towards that, or is that just the way things naturally happened? And then the question about the chord... No, I'll come back to the chord progressions afterwards.
it's always just the way things happen. It's not. It's I don't sit down and think, now I'm going to take this move, and now I'm going to do it. I don't really. I can't. I don't work like that really, and especially then, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I had no idea what we were going to do. The only thing that had happened was that we started to play live, and when you start to play, a lot more, and we were playing to bigger audiences. Sometimes a support act for a big band. But there was a kind of confrontational aspect to the way we did that. I mean, because of the nature of some of the songs, Professor Super Cool, Waiting for Mr. Moonlight, they weren't easy listening. They had kind of attitude, and he's shedding skin. People would look at us and go, "What the hell is going on here?" And then, 3 songs within one, and it was hard to kind of classify. And a lot of that was down to the fact that we got Tony in the band, because Tony had the chops to do that as a drummer.
Yeah.
If you listen to him, he was by far the best musician at that point. And Mick, the bass player, they were great. So a lot of time I just hardly played the guitar, just kind of performed. And then there was Ned doing his thing. So it was a very odd mixture, but there was definitely something going on. I mean, I was really finding my voice too. I didn't really know. I was just singing. I didn't really have anything in mind, anybody in mind particularly. I was just letting go to see whether I could do it,
I think
we had a lot of freedom, really, to be honest, with RCA. A lot of freedom to make that first album. I think it might be difficult now to get the freedom and the budget to do that kind of experimenting on a major label.
Yeah, it sounds like they gave you basically a free hand and let you find yourselves.
They did in the end. I mean, I never really, all through our tenure with RCA, I was very lucky that way. I never had to fight. Maybe right at the very end. Very end was Springtime for the World. I probably moved too fast for them to understand that, and Corda had moved on, so my allies within the company. But at that point, no, I was. They knew we had something, because we were getting good press. We were getting good. There was kind of a buzz, but we were nowhere near getting radio play or charts or anything like that.
Yeah, no, the way I found you, and this is a story I'll tell on my own podcast, but the way I found you was nothing to do with actually hearing you, and everything to do with just seeing this record sleeve in a record shop, basically.
Which one?
Limping. Saw the front cover of that original edition of Limping for a Generation. This edition, for anybody who's watching the video.
Yeah.
Saw that in a record shop, having noticed your name in a listing in the back of a magazine, and that was it. Saw your name in a listing, saw the front of the sleeve of the record, and thought, gotta try it, see what it's like.
Yeah.
I can't say it was really what I expected. So, and that's I'll come back to the question I had about chord progressions and such in a minute, but I'm going to ask you now, what do you prefer? Sophisti-pop, or as a description, sophisti-pop or jazz punk? Because jazz punk is the sort of description that they seem to throw around for Limping for a Generation. I mean, they're both horrible, aren't they?
They're both horrible. I mean, sophisti-pop is particularly horrible. I have no idea what that is. And whatever it is, I don't want to be it. It kind of, maybe that's, as I get older and I move into more easy listening territory, sophisti-pop might suit me in when I hit my 70s if I'm still making records. But it certainly wasn't something that I wanted to be then. Categorization was always a problem, and it's not my job really. It was kind of that's for music journalists.
Yeah.
And if they want to do that, that's their job. And I can disagree or agree with it. It doesn't really help anybody. It does help. I mean, I know that in these days of kind of Spotify playlists and things like that, it helps when they know what it is that you are. Then they can categorize you and put you into that particular hole.
And radio stations these days tend to be that sort of way categorized as well, from what I can tell. Is if you're not the right,
it's algorithms. I mean, they don't choose their own playlist. I mean, there are very few. I think Robert Elms, Gary Crowley. There's one or two. Craig, some at Radio 6, but most of it is the computer says, you know,
Yeah,
this
yeah. Well, any radio station as well that has advertisers, those advertisers want to know exactly what records are going to be played, right? Basically.
yeah. So you get to homogenized culture.
You
But the back,
do.
you know, we did get a little bit of support on the first album from dear old Janice Long, and Peel played Man from Russia and stuff. I mean, you know, there was a little bit of support, but mostly it was through, at that point, the written press.
Right.
Barney Hoskins came and did a long interview, and The Face and lots of magazines that were around at the time. You know, we did a lot of photo sessions. I remember that.
Well, funnily enough, before Animal Magic, and you sort of exploded in a different direction, I guess. I think a lot of but from what I could tell, the press at the time before that, Limping for a Generation era press, I think they were trying to not compare you with, but were trying to set you up as something of a sort of an alternative to the Smiths. By which I mean, the Smiths had this reputation for being a bit spiky, a little bit political, and all this other kind of thing. And I think some of the talk around you at the time of Limping for a Generation was pretty similar. That you were a spiky character, that there was a sort of political underedge to the music, that the music wasn't quite categorizable in the normal way. So, yeah, I don't think the comparison with the Smiths is one that holds water. But certainly at the time, it felt like you were an alternative to the Smiths for people who necessarily like the idea of the Smiths, but not necessarily the Smiths themselves, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that was more to do with me being a bit spiky and a bit outspoken than there being much. Well, there was a musical thing, but I mean, they had success earlier. They were much bigger. They were much bigger initially, anyway, and you know, more fully formed. They came out fully formed. You know, the first time you heard Hand in Glove.
Yeah.
I think, you thought, oh yeah, hang on, yeah, that's great. You know, I didn't really know. It was one of those where you listen and you think, oh, don't really know where the singer's coming from. Can't pick the influences. Later on, of course, you do. It all makes sense. But they were great. I'd seen them at the ICA supporting Orange Juice, who were another big. I mean, you know, I love that early Postcard Records thing. That's kind of pre-RCA, what we were kind of after. Some of those things that have emerged recently, those very early songs, those demos from 1981. You can hear it's very scratchy guitar, Joseph K. Orange Juice type things.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we were. I mean, I was just wanted to get noticed. I think that's the honest truth. You know, there was a little bit of resistance because we're on a major label. So you know, how can you be alternative if you're on a major label?
Yeah.
Of course, that was bollocks, and that was all rubbish because most of the indie labels were funded by major labels or distributed by them or whatever it was. It's all down in the music in the end, anyway.
And also, I just thank God you didn't turn into Morrissey. Do you know what I mean?
It was always there with him, I think. It was always a tendency towards that kind of cynicism.
Yeah, I got to say, I always had a love-hate relationship.
He made some great records.
Yeah,
you know, that run of singles that the Smiths did was quite special. I mean, I remember doing Top of the Pops with them, talking to Johnny Marr and saying, I really like Panic and how you nicked Metal Guru to make Panic. And then I said, and I really like Shoplifters of the World because you've nicked Children of the Revolution to make that. I said, is it Telegram Sam next? He didn't really speak to me. But you know, that's what they did, and it was brilliant. It was done so well, you know. And most of these lyrics were some, you know, they were fantastic for a while. But yeah, there was a cynical, slightly unpalatable undertone, which became evident later, I think.
I always thought your lyrics were never a million miles away from them anyway, except his were a lot more influenced by, he'd often quote directly from film scripts and such, whereas yours, a lot of the time you seem to be coming from the same sort of area, but with you it just felt more original and like it was coming from you rather than from the things you liked, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, the actual title track, Limping for a Generation, I think I nicked a lot of that from some poem. It might have been C.S. Lewis or something like that.
Fair enough.
That kind of thing. I mean, I'd say Nick. I mean, I think there was a lot of, but yeah, I didn't really know what I was writing about, but I did want to be original. I mean, He Shedding Skin, I had no idea at the time what that was about. It becomes evident to me later that, the subconscious works in a funny way. And I was going through so many changes from where I had come from as a human being in my family and in my background. And I felt that things were happening, and suddenly what I dreamed of doing was actually coming to fruition. And it was slightly weird and a bit overwhelming, but at the same time I felt quite calm about it. But I was writing lyrics that sometimes I didn't really understand, but I went with it.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I mean, they're young, and to a degree there's narcissism involved, but there's a kind of preening narcissism of a late teenager, early 20s, look at me and all that. But at the same time, there's attempts at kind of profundity and poetry and stuff. I'm grasping at something, and sometimes it breaks through and sometimes it doesn't stand up, but actually it's okay. There's nothing on there really that I wouldn't sing.
Oh no.
Out of embarrassment.
I think I was just looking at I mean, I know this album so well. I said before, Realms of Gold is probably my favourite album of all time. The other contender is this. So this is obviously my favourite Blow Monkeys. And part of that is the nostalgia thing because it was the first one that I bought. But part of that is because I've just never stopped playing it in nearly 40 years. I could put it on every day and I would still get something out of it. So I was looking through the lyrics before I sat down, despite the fact that I know them back to front. But when you know them back to front, you don't really think about what they're about. And I was just looking through them before we sat down. And I think what you do, what they're marked by, is that you hit a spot that's sort of just inside the psyche. So it's not, and there's lines about surfaces and things like that in the lyrics themselves. But I don't think you're singing about, it's like you're not singing about what's happening and you're not singing about the reason why something's happening, but you're singing about that sort of liminal space in between. So you've managed to find this really terrific spot where your lyrics are kind of have this universal ambiguity while at the same time being really specific to a feeling and an emotion. So I think they hit this really sort of sweet spot where they can reflect almost anyone and anything, but in a really specific way that feels really personal to the person who's listening to it, if you know what I mean. I keep saying if you know what I mean, but...
Yeah, well, I think I do know what you mean,
this is my live review, by the way.
They are trying to be there. There's a kind of impressionistic quality to it.
Yeah.
There's an androgyny to it. There's a sexuality involved as well. There's all sorts of mixed in there. There's all sorts, that come out from kind of and I just wanted to be brave, and I've always been aware that in order for me to inhabit a song, I have to believe in it. And the times that I haven't done that, and I could tell you a few songs where that hasn't worked, then I find it very difficult to do them live, or to do them, or to believe in them. So they have to come from a place, even if they don't have to have meaning. They just have to work. They just have to basically cast a spell. Is what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So they come from all sorts of places.
Yeah, and there's obviously also lots of just little sort of semi-political references. I mean, the most obvious, obviously, is Fat Cat Belushi, but several of the songs throw in just little digs at sort of hierarchies and sort of rich fat cats and that kind of thing. But, talking about casting a spell, trying to think objectively about this record this week, and this is I think for me, the thing that most works about it, am I right in saying that you're virtually completely self-taught as a guitarist?
Yeah.
And I
Not,
think,
no, not virtually, wholly.
well, there you go. I think that's what really tells on this record and on your subsequent records too. But I think that's the thing that's really obvious about this. And it's like one of my favourite film composers is Ennio Morricone, because Ennio Morricone takes an understanding of music but a love of jazz, and he transposes the things he loves about jazz into the sort of classical rhythms that you need for film composing. So he always makes odd choices that sound like wrong choices, but at the same time sound completely logical and totally fit. And I think Limping for a Generation is sort of 45 minutes of unexpected choices that are magical and fit. And every single one of them is always the right choice, but it's always an unexpected choice. And it's never the choice that a Noel Gallagher, for example, would make, or somebody who's been taught to play guitar by a guitar tutor. They would make a certain kind of choice, but you're making completely different choices. And like Atomic Lullaby, that's a fucking beautiful song. Absolutely astonishing production as well on that. It's completely unique and original, and it's astonishing. And yet, it doesn't have a chorus. And do you know what I mean? To release a song that doesn't have a chorus. And it's got this weird bit in the middle where actually, you do an atomic explosion in the middle of a pop song. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And yet it's the perfect choice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair comment. I mean, I sort of sit there, I'll be listening to something like Professor Super Cool, and I'll be going, and then where can I go that's really wrong? G minor. Which is a kind of Morricone move, right? I know now, but at the time I had no idea. And so it's actually influenced by Laughing Clowns. I've got to say, Ed Cooper shocked me with his choice of chord progressions. But I like what you say about it's not a choice that Noel Gallagher would make, because that, you see, I can't do meat and potatoes, and I get that, and I know it's good, and I know it's very popular, and I know people love it, but to me it's dead, So I need that the kind of shock of the excitement of the unexpected chord change, or the unexpected tempo change, or So I mean, I'm learning. I sit there. Atomic Lullaby is the first time I learn like major seventh chords and how they go together, and then I think, but it needs that as well, And how can I make that work together? Just having fun, really. I mean, I remember taking it into the band, and then it was like, what? But they loved it. I mean, they got into it, and they had the chops to do it. Like I said, you need a drummer that can do it, because he's doing a bossa nova thing, and suddenly he's doing it like. And I guess the other influence is love.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, a very great writer in Australia called Clinton Walker, who I met when I was a teenager out there. One of the presents he gave me was a copy of Forever Changes by Love. And that stayed with me, because there was beautiful orchestration, beautiful kind of Latin pop over-the-top orchestration, but underneath it all, a punk kind of epic punk band going at it. So it was clever. And a bit of Backward David in the writing. I think they even covered My Little Red Book in a kind of punk way. So it's it's just a mismatch of all those things, and it was also very effective live, because you'd see people looking at us in these totally inappropriate gigs like the Sisters of Mercy, where you play 2,000 goths, and goths are not very good at. I mean, I tried to rile them. This one's called Man from Goth, or Goth from Russia, or this one's called No Response, nothing. But I knew that they were looking at us, and you'd start off with a bossa song, and suddenly it would get super hard, and people people would be shocked into kind of having to listen. So there was a confrontational aspect to some of it. And that's probably because the years that I spent in Australia exposed me to bands like The Birthday Party and The Saints and Laughing Clowns and things that were from a different source. So I came back to London fresh, in the sense that if I had stayed, I probably would have got into a punk band in 1978, and would have taken a very different course. But because I had been exposed to these other music, this other culture, I had something else in my back pocket when I came back to London.
And of course, you forget now, but this is still just a few years after punk happened. So that whole explosion of the can-do ethic is still around.
This record came out in 84, but it's basically a 1983 record.
Yeah.
Signed, I wrote all the songs in 83. I'd only come back from Australia in 81. So, and you think what else was going on around 83, there's a lot of post-punk. There's a lot of kind of, some great stuff back when the Bonnymen were in their pomp and bands like that. There was some good stuff around too, but people were being, I love that kind of early Bit Rig and Panic stuff. Yeah. That I just was a sucker for people that played bebop style drums with distorted guitars and out-of-tune brass sections.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, and I suppose bands like Bad Manners and, the Specials or whatever, despite the fact that I don't think you do sound like them, there's definitely a little bit of shared DNA with things like that, and that was the kind of stuff that was in the air too.
I wouldn't mention Bad Manners in the same breath as the Specials. The Specials are genius.
Yeah, fair point.
Jerry Dammers is, the arrangements blew my mind when I first heard Gangsters, when I first came back, and I heard Ghost Town. Just genius, just beautiful. I got to know Jerry later on in life through Red Wedge. Lovely, lovely man. I just wish he'd been made more records, because the quality of those records, the beautiful thing when it cuts to a clarinet, when it cuts to an oboe, and then you've got this just beautiful. I love it. That was an influence, although obviously we weren't going to do reggae or ska, but the arrangement side of things really impressed me. And I've got to say that Pete Wilson, who did the strings on Limping and the strings on Animal Magic, in fact he did the strings on Digging Your Scene.
Yeah.
Although we replaced the drums and bass on that and everything for the hit record, but Pete Wilson was a massive contributor, because I think he looked at it and thought, oh God, these are mad chords, these are interesting. This guy wants to do something different. He's not sure what it is, not sure he's singing great, but I'll have a go. And he got into the spirit of it. And Pete, I played him lots of records that I liked, and I played him lots of things, but he had his own thing. And so some of the string arrangements, Professor Super Cool, wonderful string arrangements, drama. He could do drama, Pete. I tip my hat to him on that. He really helped me, and I was very lucky to be able to have the budget to do that, because it kind of suited us.
Yes, because that's the other thing about Limping for a Generation. It's not verse chorus structure like you get with a lot of bands. It's songs that tell stories. Wildflower, look at Wildflower. That's a single, and that. Yeah. I don't think there's any 10-second part of Wildflower that's the same as any other 10-second part of Wildflower, if you know what I mean.
There's a demo where it's even more convoluted.
I know! That's on the deluxe edition, isn't it? And it's like a completely different song almost.
Yeah, I always have a panic when we did it live recently, and I always turn to Mick and go, what's the chord in the middle bit? He goes, all right, but I've got a capo on. What is it? Oh God! Then we get there, and I usually get it right. Again, beautiful strings. Nev really got his tone together on the sax during the making of that album and the rehearsals. They did us a lot of good, and I did start to get my guitar playing together a bit more. And the only, like I said, and I've said this before, the only track that I thought that we fucked up was "Man from Russia," because "Man from Russia." Originally, the very first time we ever played it, and this is kind of a rare co-write with Mick Anker. Mick came up with the in the chorus and with the title. And I said, "Oh, that's great." So we were jamming it, and then it was much more of a drone, like a Velvet Underground.
Yeah.
And the actual drama. And of course, in the end, I think by attempting to turn it into a single, because everybody was so strong on that song, we lost it. So, because it wasn't right. So,
I love it though. I love the version that you released.
Well, what do you? I'm glad you do, but wasn't right for me. Wasn't right. So that one and Fat Cat Belushi. Fat Cat Belushi came out of just walking in the rehearsal room and hearing Mick playing a bass line. One of those kind of things. And thinking, yeah, that'll do. I like that. Let's get into that. Most of those songs were written in the rehearsal room in those first 6 months that we got. They just left us alone. Let's go
through the songs a bit. We've already talked for absolutely ages, so I'm going to propose to do...
Quick one to the songs.
Well, I'm going to give you 60 seconds on each. But before we do, let's talk about a couple of things that didn't end up on the album, but could have done. Kill the Pig. That's a bit of a live favourite. It's sort of intro track that you do to warm up before you go into the songs sometimes. Was there a temptation to put that on the album?
Can't remember. Don't think so. I think that, funny enough, we started doing that again recently.
I noticed, yeah.
Well, a bit of it has appeared in Said Too Much. It's one of my favourite things that we do because it's kind of like, and this is what we used to do. This is us 40 years ago. It was definitely related to those things like Pig Bag and
yes,
the band I mentioned earlier, Limping and Panic and stuff like that kind of thing. There was a band called the Pop Group who I really adored. Do you know them?
I remember the name. I don't remember them.
There's one called We Are All Prostitutes, Everyone Has Their Price. And I think they did evolve into Limping and Panic, parts of them. They were from Bristol.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
Yeah, they were from Bristol. Great drummer. That was an influence on Kill the Pig and all that. Come out and make a cacophonous noise and say, here we are. Didn't make it onto the album, no. Yeah, I think it made a B-side. It wasn't really made a recording of it, but yeah.
Well, the other thing as well, and this is not me thinking this should have been on the album, but this is me wondering if at any point this might have ended up on the album. At the time and since, there's always a temptation to finish an album with a sort of acousticy ballady song as a sort of a come down track at the end of a record. Yeah. And the closest thing you've got, I mean, there's nothing like that quite on the album itself. I suppose Professor Supercool and Wildflower are probably the nearest you possibly get really to that. But then on the B-sides, there's My Twisted Jewel, which is like a really twisted, sarcastic version of the acoustic come down song. Was there ever a moment at which that would possibly have been the song that finished the album?
No, because I think we did it after the album was finished. It was a B-side.
Fair enough, yeah. Yeah, B-side of, I think it's Atomic Lullaby. Yes, would be.
And that was basically just Tony and me. And I remember Vic and they're not on it. And I think I had flu. I think I was slightly delirious when we recorded that. I wasn't great. And it was one of those where they booked us and said, go and do a B-side. I didn't have a song, so I just made it up.
Oh, wow.
And it's got something, yeah. I had somebody played it to me, it was a couple of years ago now. And I'd forgotten completely about it. It's got drama. It would have been quite a good one, actually, to put on the album, but no. That came up, the album was done by then.
Yeah, sure, fair enough. It reminds me a little bit. The one other album that I've possibly played as much as I've played Limping for a Generation and Realms of Gold, and people listening to this won't believe this or else won't have heard of it, is an album called Friends by the Bolshoi. And My Twisted Jewel almost sounds like a Bolshoi song, bizarrely. And so it's the one thing that sort of reminds me of you, of them, and vice versa. But otherwise, you're so vastly different from each other, apart from a little bit of a sarcastic edge, I guess. Right.
Well, that's the first time we've ever been compared to the Bolshoi, so we'll take.
Do you remember them?
I do, 3-piece, right? Were they 4-piece?
Yeah, no, 4-piece, but it was three. It was 3 and a keyboard player.
Okay.
So yeah, they were a 3-piece, and then they were a 4-piece. The keyboard player joined with the second album.
Yeah, I do remember them. Yeah.
Yeah. No, actually, yeah, I'd forgotten that they'd been a 3-piece. Right, Limping for a Generation, 7 pop songs, and then you've got Limping for a Generation, Waiting for Mr. Moonlight, where you suddenly go all downbeat jazz, film noir, and then the very last track is completely different again. It sounds like the Beatles, Trash Town Incident. Are you one of these people who sits and thinks hard about the sequencing of the album, the order that the tracks come in? And was that a deliberate choice because it feels like you're telling a story? Or was that just an accident of, you know, the way nature had it at the time you were putting the record together?
You know what, JR? I haven't got a bloody clue. I can't remember. I mean, it's 40 years ago. I can't remember how we put how we put it together in terms of running order.
No, fair enough.
I thought that what I usually do is just try a few out and do it. I didn't write it with that in mind. Saying I knew that we needed to start with "He's Shedding Skin" because I love the drum intro.
Yeah.
And that big string intro into it. And I knew that Trash Town kind of was a bit of a standalone.
Yeah.
So either that goes first or last. I always like Dylan thing. He said something about he always puts first track on an album, the one that doesn't really fit. And I thought, is that right? And then I went back and had a look at one of his albums, Self Portrait.
Yeah.
It starts off with this thing called All the Wild Horses in the Sun, How We're Going to Get Any Writing Done. And it's just, he's not on it, it's just he's singing. It's the most un-Dylan track of all time. And then you cut into the Dylan album. And it's genius because it just upsets the equilibrium but prepares you for the listening experience. So I like that. In our case, no, I don't remember, but I think I would have just sat down with Pete Wilson and said, try a few running orders. I would have known that, you know, Shedding Skin's first. That's an instant. Yeah, it's got a bit of Beatles because Pete Wilson went to town and did his backwards kind of.
Well, it reminds me very much. Reminds me very much in flavour of. And oh my God, the name of the song's gone completely out of my head. The John Lennon song that finishes Revolver.
Tomorrow Never Knows.
Tomorrow Never, yeah. Reminds me quite a bit of that in its dynamics. I mean, the backwards thing is there, yes, but I'm not really just talking about the backwards thing, but I just mean the dynamics of the song. And
it's got my favourite Blow Monkeys blast riff on it ever.
Oh,
and as you get to the end, there's a harmony on it, which is really atonal.
Yeah.
And that's a bit that, I mean, that's my Laughing Clowns, Carla Bley, Fela Kuti obsession, you know, the kind of slightly out-tune, uncomfortable bass. That, you know, you have favourite bits of records. Well, that right towards the end of that Trash Town Incident, the last 8 bars, is probably my favourite Blow Monkeys bit.
Well, I would love to see that live. I think that's the kind of bit that if you played it live as the last song of the set and extended that bit out, that could be a barnstorming end to the evening with everybody singing along.
Yeah, well, the thing is, nobody, I mean, it's a cult album, though, isn't it? I mean, no one, people don't really know it compared to, say, Animal Magic and Ghost's Daughter. They don't know it as well.
Yeah, true.
We did do a thing at the Islington Assembly Halls a while back now, where we played Limping, the whole album.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. We did that. That was when Tony was still in the band. So that would have been about 2013, 2014, around there. And we played Limping, and that was great fun. It was great fun. And I must try and bring a couple of those songs back into it. I think Trash Town might be one. I always enjoyed playing. Well, obviously we do Wildfire sometimes. You know, they would do, you know, Muffy Musher in a better way. So there'll be one or two that I wouldn't mind trying.
Right, let's very quickly go through some of the others, and what I'll do is I'll throw out a title, and you've got 30 seconds or so just to give me a quick thought on it. So, I mean, we've pretty much mentioned everything, but Waiting for Mr. Moonlight.
think it's that one really evolved live. It became a thing where we would I could put the guitar down and I could sort of stalk the stage, and Mick played and Nev had this da 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 da. It was drama, and it was a chance to kind of slow things down. Probably influenced by, I don't know, I can't tell you who it's influenced by, but it's a good one actually. I quite like that one. It's got quite a rousing kind of chorus bit, although it's not really a chorus. And then the sax copies it. Yeah, I like it.
It turns into a story. I mean, like a lot of the songs on the album, the music turns into a story. It progresses rather than just sort of repeating bits, I suppose, repeating sections. Okay, here's another question.
Yeah.
He's shedding skin. The Pearl and Dean bit at the end, was there ever any pushback on that, whether it would be included on the album? Did anybody notice? I mean, it was deliberate, presumably.
Of course it's, yes.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the first time I heard that, I thought, what? And then I thought, no, they've not done that by accident.
No, of course not. It's a nod to that, I mean...
Did anybody at the record company say, no, you can't do that? You have to fade it down before you get there or something?
No, because it wasn't long. It wasn't suable.
Right.
Because it wasn't long enough. No, the record company never came in and said, no, you can't do that. And
wow.
To be honest, if they had said that, I'd have said, get the fuck out of it, because, you signed us to do what we want to do. I had that kind of attitude to it, and luckily I had Corder, who was in the studio a lot of the time when we made that, and a guy called Steve Cutler, who later became our manager, were really big supporters to us. So there were good people around us when we were recording. It was a good vibe. Remember that? A lot of visitors came to the studio, a lot of friends, good vibe in there, exciting, listening to things happening and building up, all that. For the first time that I'd ever really done this, properly. He's shedding skin. I mean, it's Pearl and Dean, but, I listened to an awful lot of, like I said, I always go back to Bacharach and David. I guess my introduction to them is Cilla Black, as an English, before I sort of went back and discovered all the other stuff, Ian White and everything else. And then that kind of 60s orchestrated pop was a big thing for me. Just growing up listening to that. And so, it was very seductive. So He's Shedding Skin has got moments, especially in the middle eight when it breaks down, whatever. It don't matter what you do. I remember thinking that when Soft Cell first came out, I really liked it. Say hello, wave goodbye. I think there's an influence in there. The way that Mark was obviously also influenced by that kind of torch singing drama, sort of feverish 60s. It's all in there, and so we were a bit more kind of punky than that, but that was, and like I said, lyrically, that's the subconscious talking. I think that's just the changes that I was going through very fast at that point, in order to deal with what I perceived was happening. I was very sharp. I was a teenager and all that, and as a young kid, I had no ambitions to do music until I picked up the guitar one day when my sister left it hanging around in Australia, and all of a sudden my life changed. So I started busking, and people stopped and listened to what I was doing. And then so by the time I get to make this record, I'm having to grow a little bit of a
facade.
Facade.
Shell sort of thing. Yeah,
because it's a weird job. It's a weird occupation where you get criticised in public by people. And there were vicious criticisms of us too, as well as good stuff. And you've got to be pretty thick-skinned and tough to put up with that, because it's an odd thing to happen. And the music press in those days, they could be very cruel, and they could be very funny, and I loved it when it was at someone else's expense, at my expense. So I'm learning to sort of deal with, at this point, a very minor public figure, but becoming something of that.
Yeah, well, I suppose you were learning
Yeah, I'm growing up. I'm having to grow
a public
it.
persona. Yeah.
So that's probably what that song's saying.
Right, one more. I'll do one more question about a song because looking down the list, we have basically mentioned everything. So unless there's something you desperately want to bring up that I haven't mentioned, but Go Public, you know, that was the first one you released off that. And as you say, it's not really very representative of the album by the time it comes out. So was there ever any thought that you'd leave Go Public off and put something else on instead?
Should have done. We did it. We recorded it too fast. The original demo was. You know, it had much more, and we ended up flashing away at it. Again, we got it wrong. You know, inexperience. I mean, we were very young. You know, I didn't have any idea how to record drums and bass, especially. They're quite light on that record. No, I mean, it was the first single. It was released as a single. It was a great title for the first single, first box. And I knew it would do nothing, and it did nothing. But it got single of the week in Enemy. I didn't understand why, but that was a big one. You go, whoa! Suddenly you get gigs on the back of that. You know, you get someone, everyone notices you, and the people in the record company go, oh, there must be something there. Put them in the studio, get an album. So we had to put it on. But no, it's not its moment. It's not our greatest moment. I could record that again now and do a much better job just on the acoustic.
Well, you should do then.
I should do that, yeah. That's too short. I'm working on my next album now.
Oh, yeah.
I've got something else coming, which I think is just going to be, well, anyway, I won't say. I think it's going to be very sparse. Just me and the electric guitar. That's what I fancy. I can't do another Journey to You right now. Because Journey to You, we got somewhere with that. That's kind of essential Blow Monkeys in a way. So I need to do something, you know, I need to go somewhere else. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, there's a definite feeling about Journey to You. And this is no slight on the other albums in between. But there's a definite feeling about that's sort of the best thing you've done since the Reformation, I guess.
Since the Reformation.
Yeah.
Not the medieval. Yeah, since the Reformation. I think that's true. I could do something like, you got me thinking about that, where I could re-record some of my songs in a completely different way. And that might be good, you know. There's all sorts of things one can do at this point, and it really doesn't matter. But
we really need about 6 albums a year from you, right?
Yeah, that would do. That would keep me busy. I think the new Monk's Road one's coming out soon. I'm happy with that one. That's got something about it.
Well, I'm going to mention that in a moment. But before I do, one more question about Limping for a Generation. So you've got the record contract, major label.
Yeah.
First album's come out, 4 singles. And like you say, you hadn't sort of troubled the charts by this point yet.
No.
You hadn't sort of gone overground at this point yet.
No, definitely not.
So, and I don't want to make this sound like it's a sort of a criticism of a question, if you know what I mean, because it's not intended that way. But was there a moment at which you suddenly felt there was a bit of an anticlimax before suddenly later then you get Animal Magic and things take off afterwards? Did Limping for a Generation feel a little bit like maybe you stalled us just for a few weeks before things actually sort of kicked into gear? Or were you just pleased with the fact that you'd done it, I guess?
I'm just pleased. I mean, to be honest, we were growing slowly. I mean, if you think about Go Public, no play. Man from Russia, got some play, got some thing. By the time we made Atomic Lullaby, I think it was the 3rd single, they made a video for that.
Yeah.
In a field in Northampton. And that got showed somewhere. And we were starting to do slightly bigger gigs. We were gigging a lot. We were playing a lot live. We were starting to sort of get our own little following, playing clubs and doing bigger supports. So it felt like we were getting somewhere. I mean, we toured with Lloyd Cole.
Yeah.
It was a good one for us to tour with. No slight on Lloyd, but they were a good band for us to open for. Because I think, You know, they were as young and as new to it as we were, but they had a hit.
Yeah.
But they were slightly more kind of preppy, sort of like. But they hadn't played an awful lot. I know that at the time, so we felt like, yeah, we can do this. We'll go on and play to his audience, and we'll blow it apart. We did a little bit. We were it was a good one for us to do. And they were very kind to us, Lloyd and everyone like that. So, but it was a great way of getting around and playing around the country, and all of a sudden we're touring and we're staying in dodgy B&Bs, and you know, playing up in Sunderland and Hartlepool and Dundee and what the hell, and so that all of a sudden, we were doing things that we hadn't done before. So it was all moving fast, and then they said, well, let's do another one. Let's do another album. Okay, it hasn't set the world on fire, but there's something going on. So that was cool, So I think, and I had started writing. I was always writing at that point. I still am, to be honest, but I was always writing at that point. So I pretty much, by the time the first album came out, I had written most of the second album. I was ready to go, and I knew it was better. I thought it was better.
Yeah, because there's that live video that was recorded way before you recorded Animal Magic, but it's got about half a dozen songs. It's a TV thing, isn't it? We'll talk about that another time, I think.
Yeah, I'd rather not.
Maybe we'll mention that and move on quickly another time then. Yes, there's that. Right, I've got to make a suggestion about what we might talk about next time we get together to do one of these things. So Here I am looking on my shelf. And oh, for God's sake, I can't see them. There they are. This is going to be my suggestion for next time.
Yes.
Given that the Monks Roads album's coming out, I think we should just, instead of focusing on one album, we should talk about Monks Road, how it happened, what your contribution's been, talk about the people you've worked with, the other people who did the other things. I realise that you'll probably have been talking about Monks Road a lot during the course of the publicity, but do you fancy having an hour-long conversation about just Monks Road in general?
Let's do it. That would be good. That'll be
next time then. Next time we'll talk about Monks Road Social. Until then, thank you very much. I think now we've done Limping for a Generation, though. I can call it a day. That's my ambition achieved.
Okay, well, I'm happy I remembered some of it, and I hope I didn't ramble too much.
I know, that was a wonderful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, J.R.
Cheers.